So you'll notice that I've annotated the PDF copy of this that I put up on Brightspace, and that's intended to give you a sense of my priorities for reading it, as well as some tips that you can use for if you were reading this completely on your own. So starting on the first page of the PDF, called page 46, you'll notice that I've underlined down here. And that's where the author comes up with the central thesis of this essay. Sponsors, as I have come to think of them, are any agents, local or distant, concrete or abstract, who enable, support, teach, model, as well as recruit, regulate, suppress, or withhold literacy and gain advantage by it in some way. So what you want to do is you want to look at what are the key words in this section of the text. Literacy is important. So if you see a word like literacy, you need to say, what does it mean? It means the ability to read and write, typically alphabetic text. Other things are agents. So agents are people who represent people or get things done, local or distant, so near or far, concrete, real person, or abstract, more of a concept, who enable, support, teach, model, as well as regulate, suppress, or withhold literacy. And so they're people who have the key to giving other people in a variety of situations the ability to read or write, or to hold back that ability. And that person is a sponsor of literacy because they're gaining advantage by it in some way. So what you want to do is maybe right now just pause this video and make sure you can put that definition that she writes here and that I've just paraphrased for you, and make sure you can put it into your own words, because you're not going to be able to do anything with why this term matters until you can explain it for yourself. One of the underlying assumptions that you need to acknowledge in order for this essay to make sense is the power of literacy. Think about how much you can do every day by virtue of your ability to read and write, and think about how much you couldn't do every day by your ability to read and write. And you'll see here that I've kind of jotted down literacy and the economy. And we live in a world where one's ability to read and write is sort of essential to one's ability to accessing the material objects that make life both survivable and more comfortable. So down here where I've written the author's research methods, you can certainly review that if it's interesting to you. But to me, because we are reading this essay to pull out the central term to really understand sponsors of literacy, you don't need to know as much about how she got there. But moving down, we have, again, the thesis moment of this essay. So in this essay, I set out a case for why the concept of sponsorship, which we discussed above, the person or the people who give or take away the ability to read and write, is so richly suggestive for exploring economies of literacy and their effects. And remember, literacy gives you access to the economy, to the effects of the economy, to the benefits and the limitations of the economy, through the use of extended case examples. So she's just saying, I'm going to give you some examples. I demonstrate the practical application. So how do we actually use this term for interpreting current conditions of literacy, teaching, and learning? So she's saying, hey, I came up with this word, this term. I'm going to teach you how to use it to understand how literacy and teaching and learning work in this world beyond the moment that she wrote this article. She says, including persistent stratification of opportunity and escalating standards for literacy achievement. Stratification just means different levels. So what she's saying is, persistently across time within our society, there's different people depending on their race, class, social class, gender, sexuality, and a million other factors, have different levels of opportunity in order to achieve what would be called appropriate standards of literacy achievement. So she's saying, why is this concept important? I'll use examples and I'll tell you the implications. What does it say for our society? All right, so this video talk is meant to serve as a supplement to your reading of Deborah Brandt's Sponsors of Literacy. So hopefully either before or after you watch this video, you'll go ahead and make sure that you give the text a read itself and make sure that the parts that I'm glossing over make sense to you. So moving on to the next page, you have a nice helpful subject heading here of sponsor, and this is where she's saying, who are sponsors? So intuitively, sponsors seemed a fitting term for the figures who turned up most frequently in people's memories of literacy learning. So it's the people that helped us learn literacy. And then she gives some examples: older relatives, teachers, priests, supervisors, military officers, editors, influential authors, right? Down here, again, you can read this as you find it interesting, but she's effectively, sponsors is a metaphor, right? It's a way of helping us understand who the people that bring literacy are, and she's saying why she thought it was a useful term, right? So gloss over that as you see fit. The next sort of key transition she makes is, in whatever form the sponsors deliver the ideological freight that must be borne for access to what they have. So ideology is a really important concept. Ideology is a really important concept that we will visit and revisit probably multiple times over the course of this year. It is broadly understood to refer to the sum total of a person's values, beliefs, assumptions, and expectations. So the ideologies exist within society, within groups, and within people. So within society, for example, democracy is an ideology. It's a core part of our belief and value as Americans. Within groups, a religious belief might be an ideology. You could even say that following a sports team very fervently might be an ideology. And then again, within people, you might have values, beliefs, assumptions, and expectations that exist within your family. So what she's saying is, whoever this sponsor is, whether it's your mom or the President of the United States, they are bringing their ideology, their values and beliefs, the values and beliefs that belong to the society that you live in, to giving you access to what you have. So the delivery of literacy is never neutral, never politically, social, economically, spiritually neutral. This isn't a good thing or a bad thing, but it's sort of a key to know, to understand why this matters. So the example that she gives that I think is pretty legible is this Little League example here. So she says Little Leaguers are literally sponsored by a local insurance agency, and the Little Leaguers, they're wearing it and they're representing it. They're representing the insurance agency. They're representing, buy this insurance, here's this value. But they don't necessarily subscribe to it. They have to represent it in order to play ball. This is a pretty tough thing, but just try and take to yourself, literacy is never neutrally delivered. She says most of the time, however, literacy takes its shape from the interests of its sponsors. So if I'm a sponsor of literacy for you, I strongly believe in giving all access to writing and giving all access to the power that writing can carry, and that's kind of the ideology that you'll see runs through my classroom. So it says obligation towards one's sponsors will run deep, so how you're sponsored will affect what, why, and how people write and read. So then we go on to another underlined key section. The concept of sponsors helps to explain then a range of human relationships and ideological pressures that turn up at the scenes of literacy learning, from benign, sort of harmless sharing between adults and youths to euphemized coercions in schools and workplaces, so they're kind of saying to propaganda, to the most notorious impositions and deprivations by church and state. So when we think about, well, what would it mean to deprive one from literacy, remember that prior to the Civil War, enslaved African Americans were not allowed to learn to read. And so those who did were doing so in contrast to the ideology of the system that they were forced to live in. So going on to the final page, we're almost through. This is sort of summing up what matters. This is going into different examples. It's a little dense, but they're different examples of where literacy was granted or suppressed. And then she sort of starts to say, why is this useful? So she says, in raising this association with formal systems of patronage, I do not wish to overlook the very different economical, political, and educational systems within which U.S. literacy has developed. So she's saying, I've looked at some international examples, I've looked at some historic examples, and I get it. The United States is different. But where we find the sponsoring of literacy, it will be useful to look for its function within larger political and economic arenas. Literacy, like land, is a valued commodity, a valuable thing in this economy, a key resource for gaining profit and edge. This value helps to explain, of course, the lengths people will go to secure literacy for themselves or their children, but it also explains why the powerful work so persistently to conscript and ration, which just means to hold back the power of literacy, right? So you can keep reading here, but this is really explaining why it's important. And it's a little bit like what we were saying with the literacy moments, that there are the literacy events, that there are high stakes and there are low stakes. There are sponsors of literacy that are really well-intentioned or really benign or really innocuous. I teach, my son to read because, well, he's not really taking off, but I surround my children with books because I want them to be able to read easily when the time comes, so they'll have an easier time in school, right? That's coming from a good place, but not everybody who's wielding this power is coming from a good place or a bad place. This is also a critical concept, which means critical in the sense that we can use it to better understand the world in which we reside, but we don't mean it critical in the sense of criticizing. And so remember, as you start to trace the potential sponsors of literacy from your own lives, then those can be really positive experiences. So hopefully this little video isn't too long-winded and it maybe helped you understand this essay a bit better. I'll put this in the forum, but some questions I want you to think about is, why is literacy valuable? Who or what taught you to read? Who are some sponsors of literacy that you might have encountered? And why does it matter?